we're not going to spend too much time, obviously, on slides because we want to spend a lot of time with Excel. But when we're talking about reporting in Excel, a lot of times we're pulling in data, but really what we're going to spend most of the time on today is what to do with that data. So how to get that into what you would call, or what you've heard coined, a dashboard, something that is really more meaningful than just dumping data out into Excel. So we've been doing that for years and years. And so kind of the things that we need to think about is, what do we want on our report, or in this case our dashboard? How do I find it? And then where do I even get started?
Okay, let's go next.
So as far as what should be in your report or dashboard, you know, it's always better to have these, to make them more meaningful, is to kind of control the amount of data. If you just dump 1 million rows of data out into Excel, you could do that on paper and save yourself the effort. And so what we try to do is stress, you know, pick some things that are logical, like maybe the top 5 or the top 10 or 20 type data points, and maybe look at data for the last, you know, 90 days, 120 days. You know, don't show the last 25 years worth of receivables aging, because probably doesn't really matter so much. And mostly what we've seen people do in Excel are things around financial and things around sales. And so we're going to kind of focus on the sales today, actually. So, okay, next slide. And what we're going to look at today is pulling some sales data out and look at what we've sold by customer, what we sell or have sold by item, and then maybe some customer information over time, and then be able to drill into an individual customer record and trends, and actually get Excel to do some thinking for us and to project out what a trend for a particular customer might look like. And so keep in mind, these are real-time reports, and so as the data in your Dynamics GP system changes, the Excel reports or dashboards will be updated as you open them, or if you go to data refresh, you're always going to get the most recent information. You don't have to call the accounting department and say, hey, can you send me a new report, or can you update this report for me? And if you are the accounting department, you don't have to take those calls. So that's kind of the idea, is these are real-time connections back into our Dynamics GP data. Okay, next slide, probably the last slide here.
Oh, double hit it. Here we go.
There we go. Okay. So just a couple of quick recommendations is, I usually suggest you kind of sketch out what you want to do in Excel, kind of sketch it out on paper, so you kind of have a visual image of this in your mind. And as you kind of start to put this data together, you kind of have pre-thought through what it might look like, and not finished product, you know, publisher ready, but just paper and pencil type thing. Think about the requirements, you know, what do I need to get, and kind of where do I need to get it from. We talk a lot about header versus detail, and that's a common theme in GP, Dynamics GP report writing, is you know, what's in the header part of the screen versus the detail. The detail is always kind of the scrolling window, the grid part of the screen, whether it's a journal entry or sales transaction entry window or purchase order entry window. The grid part is always that middle part where the rows of data or the lines of data are, and then most everything else is considered part of the header. And of course, we want to reuse work as we build these and think about future reports. We want to use things that we've done in the past and not try to reinvent every time, if at all possible. And I always tell people, when you build stuff in Excel, you're never finished. The more people get, the more they'll ask for, this is great, but if you could just do this, this, or that, or if we could sort it by this way, or if I could have another report, it seems like it's just an ongoing thing. So just keep that in mind. You want to leave yourself plenty of room to grow and not box yourself in on some of the reports. So, okay, next slide. And
there we go.
Next one. Okay, so so how do we get to the data? Well, we're going to look quickly at the reports, that a couple of them that Microsoft has provided. that are already in the system. Those, there's a couple hundred of those if you're on GP 2010, 2013, 2015, and so those are always a good place to start, and a lot of people do take those reports and just modify them, and that's certainly okay. There's something called a view that Microsoft provides, and they don't provide it for us, they provide it for themselves because they run a lot of reports. A lot of the GP menu reports run off a view, and a view is just a condensed version of what's in the database, and we'll talk about that when we get into Excel a little bit. But we can use their views, so even though they use them, we're free to use their views. We can create our own views, so and that's something we can help you with if that's a foreign term at this point, but pretty simple to do. We could go directly to the database, that's the tables, and so if we wanted the customer master information, we could go directly to the database and pull that out of the table that holds that data, and so that's certainly a common way. And of course, once we build reports in Excel, we want to make sure that we don't breach our security model that's in place, and so if somebody doesn't have access to payroll, we don't want to give them an Excel report that probably has payroll data in it and get in trouble. And so the Excel reports that are live actually get their security from the report roles, they're called our PT roles in SQL Server. And so again, if you're comfortable kind of in the SQL area, that will make sense on what that is. If you're not, that might be something we have to help you with, or your IT folks, but SQL Server has report roles that are built in, and Dynamics GP uses those roles. Excel uses those. SQL reporting services for the SSRS reports use those roles, and so that's where our Excel reports actually derive their security from, and so you have to be very conscious of that if you're publishing data and who actually can see it and should see it and who should not see it. So just kind of an FYI there. So, okay, Michael, I think that's probably, I keep saying that's the last slide. One of these will be the last slide. Oh yeah, okay, this is actually good. It's coming, yeah. The Excel elements that we're going to look at in the next 45 minutes are all of these things: pivot tables, grouping, conditional formatting, sparklines, charts, and slicers. Some of you might know what all of those are and you use them every day. It's more likely that most of you don't know what any of those are and have never used those, and that's perfectly okay. You're going to see how easy it is to use these tools with pretty good skill and really see where you can take reporting in Excel. Okay, next slide.
And that was the last one.
All right, now it's the last one. Okay, very good. So now I'll take control back.
Okay, I'm switching it back here.
Okay, so let me know when you can see my Dynamics GP.
Coming in clear.
Okay, good. All right, so before we actually get into Excel, I wanted to point out a couple of the Excel reports and dashboards that are actually in the system. And so if you toggle over into any of the series here, so if I move over into inventory, for example, and now this is GP 2016 that you're seeing, but this will look just like this in 2015 or 2015 R2, 2013 R2, and actually GP 2010 has the Excel reports. And so if I click on the Excel reports up here on the left navigation, you'll see the system goes through and actually loads up the reports that it went out and found. And so, and it tells me where it's installed or where the reports are. And of course, I'm in the inventory area, so I would expect to see inventory reports. What we have, though, when you're looking inside of GP is you actually have a report and then you have the related data connection. And that data connection is not something that you'll see any data with. That's just the live hook back to your Dynamics data. So what I usually do when I'm in GP is I will sort on this option column until I get all of my reports grouped together, because I don't really care about the data connections right now. And so you'll notice that I've got a number of Excel reports here, and each series or each module, if you will, inside of GP, Microsoft has built a dashboard here for us to use. And so if I tick off the inventory dashboard and click View, you'll see that it goes and gets the data and opens up that dashboard in Excel. And so this is out there for you. It just has to be hooked to your data, which is where the data connection comes in, and that's very simple to do. But of course, mine is hooked to the sample company. But this really is really designed to just kind of get us started with Excel reporting and dashboarding. And what you'll see in most of what Microsoft has built are a combination of reports, so in this case raw data. So I just am looking at the item quantities by site, and of course you know, all of these can be toggled to see just one or multiple parameters here. And so there's everything in the site called warehouse in my sample company. But they have actually built some dashboards off of that data. And so we've got things here like slider bars to actually handle moving from period to period, in this case quarters, very quickly, and so we don't have to have users key in dates and so forth. And so there's some very nice kind of what I call starting points here, and a lot of people do start with these Excel reports or dashboards that come with the software. And so, and there's a couple hundred of these, and of course if you're not using certain modules, and obviously those reports won't have any data, so payroll and HR, for example, there's a bunch of Excel reports in there, but if you're not using those parts of the system, then yours won't populate. So here I've flipped over to purchasing, and we can see here a number of reports, and it looks like just you might see some lines here as it comes through the meeting. Those lines aren't really there, but it looks like maybe the meeting is not refreshing quick enough on some of this. But you know, here's a purchasing dashboard, and again I can tick that and view it, and I've got a nice dashboard here that is related to everything in the purchasing module, and so including requisitions, outstanding purchase orders, and so forth. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't seen these, if these look brand new, that you might go check these out. If you don't see your Excel reports installed, that's something your internal folks, whoever supports your GP, can do, or we're happy to do that. It just takes a matter of minutes to get the Excel reports installed if they're not there. And so that's something that our people can do, just walk you through over the phone. So literally it's about 5 or 10 minutes.
And Brian, I had a quick question if you have time right now.
Sure, sure.
And the question was, would this apply if you're using Dynamics Nav instead of GP?
The dashboards and the predefined things that you're seeing are inside of GP, but what we're going to do in Excel would definitely apply to GP and Nav and AX, any other product you're using. But what you're seeing right here are the dashboards that are part of GP.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And actually, I'm going to go ahead, sure, I'm going to go ahead and close GP, so we just get that out of the way. And we're going to spend the rest of the time in Excel. And so now I am running Excel 2016, but this works really with any Excel version that's supported. So anything back Excel 2010 and later, you'll be able to do what we're going to do today. And so I'm just going to start with a blank worksheet here. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to create a couple of sales reports / dashboards. And I kind of like the dashboard flavor of the report, but we could look just at raw data if we want to, but dashboards are a whole lot more fun. And so the first thing we have to do, remember, is connect to the data. And that's really, in my opinion, the only difficult part of this is how do I actually go get my Dynamics data? And this would be true for NAV or GP. You could actually pull in data in any other SQL database that you have. So if you have a billing system or any kind of a external system, it could be CRM, anything that's sitting out there in your SQL server or environment could actually be attached to from Microsoft Excel. And so I'm going to use our Dynamics data because that's what we're talking about today, but this is really generic when it comes to actually grabbing data. So the first thing we want to do is in Excel, we want to go up under the Data tab, and then once I hit the Data tab, then of course the Data ribbon shows up. And so I'm going to, under Get External Data, I'm going to say From Other Sources. And so here is really a long list of things that could be a little different on yours depending on which version of Excel you have. For example, OData is something relatively new. You may not have that in yours, which is fine. We could go directly to SQL Server. So if you're really SQL savvy and you just want to go directly into the SQL Server, that's okay. That's ultimately what we're doing here anyway. But typically, I like to use one of the wizards, and that could be Microsoft Query, which is pretty simple. I do like the data connection wizard because that kind of walks us through it. And so to me, this is the most user-friendly of the options that we have here. And so when I open that, you'll see now that I've got some options, and of course I can get to the SQL Server from here, and so that's basically the same as the first option on the prior menu. But what I'm going to do is select my ODBC because that's how our GP is actually connected to the SQL Server. And if I was doing this with Dynamics Nav, I would go directly to the SQL Server. I wouldn't necessarily have to go through an ODBC connection. That would be an extra step for Nav users, but for GP users, we do use that. And so that probably is the easiest. And when I click Next, you'll see, because I selected ODBC, it actually shows the ODBC connections that are on this computer. Not anything to do with my user ID or anything of the sort. It's what is installed on this particular machine. And so here I'm going to use my GP 2016 data. And again, if I was on Dynamics Nav, I would just skip this step and I'd go directly into the SQL Server. And here it's asking me to log in, so we do have a little security. And I'm going to go ahead and log in as SA because that's my only account here in SQL. But this would be really whatever you would log into Nav or GP with. And when I click OK, then the connection wizard comes up. And when I click the drop down here, and incidentally, if you're going directly into the SQL Server, this is actually where you end up. And so we're kind of at the same point now, regardless if we were doing GP or Nav. And so it senses that I selected a database in the past, and so it saved that. But these are all the databases that are installed in my SQL Server. And so, and of course I logged in as SA, so I've got lots and lots of security here. So in other words, there's no restrictions. But these are all my SQL databases, and so I just have to know which data my company is using. And again, that's pretty simple to find out. And it's probably named something very similar that you would recognize as your company. And so remember we talked about views. And so first I have a list of views. And if I scroll down, then I have a list of tables. And so here's where you have to decide, do I want to go directly into the SQL tables where the data resides and bring those out? And of course you could link tables together. Sometimes it takes multiple tables to actually get the data back that we want. And that's perfectly okay. But I mentioned these views, and this really is Microsoft saving us a whole lot of time and effort. And so you'll see things here that are, most of them are pretty self-explanatory. And so, you know, let me just scroll down into some of the Dynamics views here. And you'll notice there are some system views here, and so those are perfectly fine. We probably don't really ever need to get anything from the system views. But as we scroll down, we'll see that there are things that are named pretty self-explanatory. And so let me get I think I wasn't seeing, there we go. So here we see analytical accounting classes, analytical accounting, you know, actual budget inquiry view, AA distribution queries, you kind of start to see some of these, that start to make sense. And so if you're using analytical accounting, that will make sense. If you're not, then that's fine. Those are just examples here as we kind of scroll through the views. And so what the views do really is we've already connected the tables that have the data, and they're brought into the view. And you might say, well, why would we want to do that? Why couldn't we just go to the tables? You could, but the data tables in GP and NAV have lots and lots of stuff in them. Some of that stuff we probably don't care about. And so the view actually allows us to just bring those things out of the data tables that we're actually going to use for our project. And so it's a cleaner, less overhead, so to speak, grouping of the data elements that we might actually want to use. And again, we can use Microsoft's views that they created for their own reports, or we could create our own, or we could go directly to the table if we didn't, we weren't worried about viewing all of the other data points in there that we might not care about for our reports. So you'll see I've got some fixed assets views and so forth. So you kind of start to see that it's a little bit easier to figure out where things are in the views than it probably is in the actual data tables. And so I'm going to go down into the sales area, and these are alphabetical, so thank goodness. And so once we get down into the sales, I'm going to try to find something, either sales transactions, or maybe we'll use the sales line items. So sales transactions and line items probably are similar, and some of this you kind of have to play around with a little bit to see, do I have the right place? Is the data that I want what I'm actually attaching to? But let's start with sales line items. So that sounds like sales order entry, invoices, returns, back orders, and so forth. It sounds like all of that detail might be right here. And so when I say next, this really just allows me to put a description here. So if I do a gazillion of these and I want to kind of just describe what it is that I'm doing and pulling out, I could do that, but we don't really need to do that. So I'm just going to click Finish, and it's saying, hey, you've already got a connection to that. Do you want to replace it? Well, yes, I do. Okay. So now here's maybe the first phase of panic, and this is where people usually get a little bit cross-eyed because it's asking all kinds of stuff about the pivot charts and tables. So a good rule of thumb is if you want raw data, you just want it to come out into Excel, just row after row after row, then you could bring that in as a table. And a table is just the spreadsheet is going to get filled in with data. And that's okay. And you could do that, and you could still build reports off the table, but what you're doing is you're bringing all of the actual detail from your SQL database, whether it's GP or NAV, you're bringing that into Excel. And that's a live connection. And so as your SQL data, as your GP data or your NAV data, as that grows, then your Excel file is going to grow because it's going to be a mirror image of that data that's in the database. So, and that's fine, that will work, but best practice is usually not to just replicate all of the data that's in those sales tables, in our example, from my Dynamics GP database into Excel. I don't really need to do that. What I need to do is get to the data, but I don't actually need to mirror the data over in Excel. And so, if I have 5, 6, 7, 10 years worth of data, at some point this is going to get very, very large, and if nothing else, slow down my report generation. So what I'm going to do is pick a pivot table report, and what that does is create a live hot connection back to my data, but it doesn't actually bring the data into Excel. It just allows me to see the data, and so that's really much more efficient. And by the way, I'm not ever writing anything back to the database. So I'm reading it out. I'm never writing anything back. So there's no way I can hurt my data in my GP or my NAV system at this point. That's virtually impossible. And so we can't, if we totally mess this up, we close the file and start over. So we're not ever doing anything to our underlying accounting data. Okay, so, and again, we've got some security here. So the system is saying you better identify yourself. And when I do, it makes a connection back to my data. And so now you'll notice it didn't actually load the data into Excel. It just showed me, here's the data that you said you wanted to view. And because I said I want a pivot table report, it's assuming that I want to do that, and it's open the pivot table. And again, this is where if you don't have much experience with charts and tables and so forth, a lot of people close down and go home or go to lunch. And so you're going to see that this is not difficult, and you don't have to, there's nothing to fear. So here, let's start off with just some sales by customer. And so really, I just want to find my customer name. And so again, these are all alphabetized and pretty easy to see what is represented here. And so we'll just go down into customer name, and so there we see it. And so you'll notice that that puts that in as a row, okay? And those are my actual customers. And so that's pretty simple. And then I just want sales data beside it. And so very, very simple. And so now this is where, you know, you have to maybe do a little research online, or ask some of our folks what it is that I need to get sales data. I happen to know, because remember, we're actually looking at sales line items. So we've got kind of very granular detail here. And so if you think about an order entry screen, line by line, I really want that extended price is what I want. But I do want it summarized. So, but you know, that's kind of my starting point to get to the total, and I want that to be a value. So I'm just going to drag that down into values, and you'll notice that Excel automatically summed that for me, where it says sum of extended. Now, if for some reason I didn't want that summarized, I could click on it and go to the value settings for the field, and I could say, you know, I want to count. So I want to see how many times these people bought. Not what they bought or what they spent, but how many orders or invoices, whatever it might be, what's the quantity in my order entry system. And so I can easily toggle that into a quantity. But we're finance people, some of us, and so we're going to use the dollars. And so here, this is good, but remember when we were talking earlier, we don't necessarily just want a dump of data out in Excel. So I'm going to kind of limit this to maybe my top 10 or 20, so to speak. And so all I have to do is right-click, and I'm going to go to Filter, and Excel will say top 10, but of course it doesn't have to be just 10. It can be the top whatever you want. And so I'm going to say I want to show here the top 10 items, but I want it by the extended price. So in other words, the top 10 by sales dollars, because that's what I have represented there. And so when I do that, then it queries off or clears off the rest of the data. And so, and now here we might want to say, we put a filter, or maybe a sort here rather, and say we might want to sort, actually the dollars is what we want to sort, largest to small. And so, you know, that's when we're looking at kind of reporting or dashboarding. A lot of times we like the greatest one on top. Don't have to be that way, but that's how I'm going to build it. And then, of course, these are just, you know, being truncated off, the zeros and so forth. So I'm just going to do the traditional thing here and make these look a little bit more like dollars and cents. So really just standard Excel stuff there. There's nothing unusual that we're doing there. And so so that's pretty good. That's the beginning of a pretty simple dashboard. But remember, this order entry data, it comes out with orders, quotes, invoices, returns, back orders, and so forth. And that's okay, but I might want to be able to toggle between invoices and orders, and maybe see back orders and returns. Well, right now it's kind of all lumped in there. So what I want to do is use a tool in Excel called a slicer, and I want to be able to then filter by the order document type. So so what we'll do is just kind of highlight the chart here, and then we're going to insert, and we're going to say slicer. And because I highlighted the chart, it read all of the components of the chart. Now if I inserted the slicer without the chart being active, then it wouldn't know what I wanted to slice by. And how do you know the chart's active? Well, I went over there and clicked in it. But when you do that, if you've ever used pivot charts or tables, you know when you click on any part of the chart, it brings up the pivot table fields menu here over on the right. And so that's how you know your chart is being active to the system. And so here we want to put a slicer in by the order type. And because I'm using GP data versus NAV data, that's going to be under the SOP document type, or maybe the SOP type. And so we just need to go down and find it. And this is really the only difficult thing about it is, you know, where is what I'm looking for. And so there's SOP type. Now in NAV, I think it's called something slightly different because NAV doesn't call it sales order processing, but I think it's called order type. And so again, you know, pretty easy to figure out, but might take a couple of minutes to kind of get the hang of that for the first time through. And so when I do that, then my slicer, I'm going to park it right up here, and we'll shorten it up a little so it looks a little nicer. And so now I can actually toggle the document type, and so you'll notice as I click on invoice, now I'm pretty confident I'm just getting invoices. If I wanted to see orders, for example, or just quotes, then you'll see the data reflects accordingly. And so nothing really, you know, rocket science type so far, all just common Excel tools. So now let's add another chart, and what we want to do here is actually bring in the actual items or the products. So I'm seeing sales dollars, that's good, but now I want to see product. What did I actually sell? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the existing chart, so just Control C there, and we'll stick that right over here and just make a duplicate of it. And I'm going to insert a couple of rows up here at the top just so we have a little bit of space. And so by copying and just pasting the chart, of course I've got the exact replica of the chart there that I had over on the left. And so when I highlight this chart and my pivot table fields menu comes up, now I'm just going to replace a few things here. And so I don't necessarily want customers and dollars, I want items and quantity. So I want to see how much I sold. And so really what I can do is just, instead of rebuilding the chart, I can just replace the fields that I have with the ones that I want. So I'm going to replace customer name with item number, and we can kind of use the search here. So item number is right there, and I'm just going to drag that down into rows. And of course now I've got customers and items. Well, I don't need customers now, so I'm just going to drag that back up into the fields, and presto, I've got items. And when I get over to the column H here for the sales dollars, I want to go find the quantity that I sold. So I'll just find quantity, and I'm going to bring that down into values, and I'm going to get rid of the extended price. And so with just a few mouse clicks now, I've got a brand new graph or chart that shows me the items and the quantities. Now, of course, it's bringing out everything, so you know, I can still sort this by largest to smallest, and so we can do that. And we can, you know, if we want to bring the filter back out to top 10, just so this looks uniform. And again, a quick glance here says we want the top 10 items meaning our text, sorted by the quantity. Okay, yep, so that's it. Okay, and so now you'll notice as I go back to my slicer and I click on the document type, I actually now have both graphs functioning based on the slicer. Now, why is that? It is because I actually copied the chart with the customers in it and created the chart with the items. Had I started from scratch, I would have had to manually add the item chart into the slicer. And so if I wanted to, I could rename these pivot tables just to keep track of them. Instead of the system saying pivot table 1, I could call it customer sales, for example. And this one we might call item sales. And so when I right-click on the slicer now, and I go into report connections, you'll see that both tables or both pivot charts are included in the slicer. And it's real easy because I named them instead of pivot table 1 and 2. It's real easy to see now that I do in fact have both of these included in my slicer. If for some reason I didn't want the item sales to actually be driven off the slicer, I can just remove it from that functionality. And that way when I toggle the slicer, it would only toggle the customers and the extended price over there, so my dollars. So, okay, so pretty good, pretty simple to create these things. And again, you can do very, very quickly as you're building these charts out. Okay, so let's create a little bit more room up here. And what I want to do is, because I have the dollars in the items and everything seems to be working, but what time frame am I getting this data from? Is it everything in the system? Is it today? It's really hard to tell, and it's kind of everything in there. So really what I want to do is put a timeline on this so that I can control the time. And we'll use one of the Microsoft timelines. They had that slider bar on some of their dashboards. And so here what we'll do is insert, and instead of a slicer, we'll go right beside it and use a timeline. And so, and it says, okay, what do you want to base the timeline on? And so really what I want to do is look at the document date, because that's kind of my invoice date or my order date or my back order date. And so, but you'll see you've got a lot of options here. You might want the GL posting date. And so, you know, it's up to you. But I'm going to control mine today based on the document date. And so that inserts the date slider. And it came out in months. Well, I don't really want it in months. That's a little too granular. So right here where the months is, you'll notice there's a drop down. I'm going to switch mine to quarters. And so now for all of the years in the system I have data, I can quickly toggle between maybe there's Q2 of 2017 and Q1 of 2017. And so you'll notice that when I click on Q1, the customer data changes. But if you notice, my item chart right below the date slider is no longer changing. And so because it's not smart enough to know that that one should have been hooked, because I didn't copy a chart and build this chart from it, I created it from scratch. So all I have to do is right-click and go into the report connections and say, you know what, I want you to control both of these charts with the date slider. And so now you'll see as I toggle through the dates, in this case quarters, that I have both charts actually functional based on my slider time bar. And because I don't have a lot of data in here, I am going to just kind of expand these out a little ways so we get a good selection of data. And yep, so that's just about everything I've got. Okay, so so that's good. That's making a pretty nice dashboard at this point and some nice reporting. Really what I want to do though is I want to really look at the customer information. So kind of this graph up here, I want to look at that, but I want to actually view that by period and with a little more detail than the slider bar. And so again, I'm just going to start with what I have here. So we're not going to reinvent when we don't have to. And so I'm just going to copy and paste that exact chart right below it. And so I can work with that now here a little bit. And so really what I want to do is put the date information right into my chart. And so when I highlight the chart, I want to go over to my field choices here, and I want to find maybe my document date. So, and there's document date, and I really want to make that a column in the chart. So in other words, instead of 2 columns, I'm going to have multiple columns. And so when I do that, you'll see Excel is smart enough to do the same thing it did in the date slider up above, where I can do years, quarters, or get actually right down to the date. And so I don't have to do anything. That was just a few seconds, and it looks like maybe to someone that doesn't know that I've spent weeks and weeks on all of this work so far. And so what this does is allow me to expand out into the different quarters. And so you'll see now with a couple of drill down clicks that I can see down to the month, but I can roll that up to quarter or by year. And so let me get over to 2017, and so there I have some data in multiple quarters, and so I can see first quarter, I can see second quarter, and as I open that up, I can actually get down to months. And so that allows me to build those drill downs right into the chart. And so this is good. I've got a lot of things going on here, and so sometimes I might want to see some trend information on maybe, hey, this kind of hard to tell. It looks like we had a pretty big sale here, but then this guy hasn't bought much. And then we had another big sale. So I might want to use some trending informations, and so we will use what's called a spark line to kind of give us a visual cue of where these customers are actually headed. And so I'm just going to kind of come over here, and well, in fact, let me just get the data. I don't need my totals so much. I want to actually see the detailed data. And so once I highlight that, then I can go up under Insert, and I can go to Spark Lines off my ribbon, and I want a line, and the system says, okay, well, you've colored in what you want. Now where do you want to put that spark line? And so I'm going to set that right here, and we'll put it right there kind of in the same area that I have dollars is where I want to put the spark line. And so when I click OK, it actually creates that for me, and we'll open that up a little bit so you can see it. And maybe I'll change the color of that just so it'll be a little easier to see. And then I want to make that a little bit larger, and so I'll use the weight option here and make some heavy there. That should be good and bold. And so this tells me at a quick glance on, if I've got hockey stick one way or the other sales activity with a particular customer, this is actually going to show that. And so when I close that up, you'll notice the data that is represented is actually what's in the spark line. And so, as I drill into the different parts of the data, these spark lines will change based on what I'm actually asking the Excel to present here. And so, so that's, kind of a nice thing to have in a report or on a dashboard. And we can kind of start to dress this up a little bit. So maybe if we go back into our first graph here, you've probably all used the conditional formatting, but if I want to see just an interpretation of what this looks like without having to go through the numbers, so to speak, I'll just highlight the area that I want to put the formatting on, and I'll just use, again, kind of core Excel functionality called conditional formatting, and I'll add some data bars, and so maybe something that's seen through the meeting here. And so we can see there that I've still got the dollars, but here I can actually see the largest down to the smallest kind of in a visual representation. So again, if you're someone or you're preparing this for someone that likes pictures and images, so this kind of like more dashboard stuff, this will be a nice addition sometimes to the actual data. Okay, so let's see, we've got time for one more quick one. So we'll do something similar to this, but let me close these up a little bit. And what I'm going to do is copy off and paste like we have been doing here this particular chart. And so we'll just go get a copy of it and move that down here. And so what I want to do with this last chart is I want to be able to focus on one customer only and not see a whole bunch of other customers. Now you might say, well, hey, you can do that right here. You know, you can untoggle all these, and that's true, and that's very true, but I want Excel to actually do a little bit of thinking for me now. And so I'm going to use a different tool here when I ask Excel to do some more of the work. And so here, based on this particular chart, and so let me get the data back, what I'm going to do is insert now a graph. So again, just all kind of core Excel functionality here, and we'll just pick one of these. Because I have the data highlighted, it puts that directly into the graph for me. So we'll set that right up here beside it. And so it just takes what I have on the left and builds a graph based on the right into this bar chart. And so that's okay, but again, I want to kind of focus on one customer. And so with this graph, what I want to do though is I want to flip how the graph is presented. And so here I can right click, and if I select data, and what I want to do is switch the rows and the columns. And so you'll see why we're doing that here in a minute. And you'll notice that doesn't do anything to the rest of my dashboard. And so that's really just my last graph here. And so now what I've done is I've moved the customers along the top part of the graph and the dates along the left. And so let me bring this under here so we can see them both at the same time. And so of course that changed the bar chart here a little bit. And so now what I want to do though is I want to insert another slicer so I can view just a customer at a time. And so if I highlight the chart and I just go to insert and I go back to my slicer tool, and what I want to do is get the customer name here so I can toggle that. And for some reason on the slicers there's not a sort, so you kind of, or it's not a search, you kind of have to scroll down. At least they're sorted alphabetically, and so you have to scroll down and find what you want. And so here's customer name, and let's see, we'll move that right over here. And so now if I toggle just a customer, so this allows me to see it now customer by customer. And so so this is good. This is good. This is somewhat of a polished product that we could actually use now. But I want to put a little bit of icing on the cake here, so to speak, and I want to insert a function in Excel that allows me to put a trend line. So, you know, where's this customer actually headed? Now we can see here we sold hardly anything, and then we had a couple of good years, and then we're back down to nothing in 2018. But, you know, some of these it might be a little harder to tell where's the trending going. And so all I do is right-click on the graph and go to Add Trend Line. And so we've got a number of trend lines here. You kind of pick one you like. I personally like the logarithmic. The logarithmic is really kind of tends to smooth out the trending. It doesn't really go in for the sharp curves up and down, and it's more of a kind of a you know, smoother, looking at a lot more data and a lot more history. And of course I don't have a ton here for it to look at, so I'm going to use that one, but again that's just personal preference. But then I want to use this forecast area down here, and I want to say I want you to forecast out for the next 6 periods, and of course that would be years, which I don't have data yet, but I want Excel to forecast out what this trend would look like if things keep going the way they're going. And so let me get that out of the way and close my trend line box.
And also, a quick heads up, Brian, we're about 5 minutes, and we did have a couple
Okay.
questions in them.
Okay, all right, very good. So here it shows me the trend of where sales might be going. Ooh, see here I got a problem. If I keep doing this, you know, we're going to bottom out here. So really the last thing is just to make this a fairly nice dashboard, you really want to go into View, and I recommend that you turn off the grid lines, and just so it doesn't look like it's Excel. And of course you could rearrange these things and put your logo up here and so forth, and put this out on a drive somewhere that people can get to. And this actually allows us to have a refreshable dashboard with data and charts and graphs in one simple Excel file. And we did all that in less than an hour. And what questions do we have, Michael?
Okay, so the first one we have is, you said it doesn't pull the data into Excel. Where's the data being held that is being manipulated to create the pivot table?
The data is still back in either the GP or the NAV database. All I'm doing is telling Excel to read that data as I populate these charts. Now if I close this and reopen it, it'll refresh the data. If I go to data and refresh, it would actually refresh the data for me. You'll see a little wheel there spinning as it goes and refreshes the data back. And so it's reading the data out of the SQL ERP database live. Good question.
Great. Okay, the next one we have is, one second. Are the item sales only for the top 10 customers?
Yes, they would be, because I limited it to the customers that are being displayed. If I wanted to disconnect that from the customers, all I do is come into my graph type, and I could disconnect that from the customer side. Actually, you know what? That is, as I'm saying that, that's not true. I'm showing it by item type, but the item sales are not the top 10 customers. So these are the top 10 items that I've sold, independent of who the top 10 customers and dollars are. So my mistake. Forgot what we built here.
And the next one we have is, if I'm a super user and preparing a report for someone who's not even a licensed NAV user, how does this work? Or is it even possible? And if possible, how's the security handled again?
It works exactly the same way. The rule is you would not need a NAV user per se. You would not need a GP user per se. You do need a SQL user for both GP and NAV, because we are tapping the SQL data live. And so you'd need a SQL Server user that was not an ERP user. And price-wise, those are generally less than $200. And we'd set that user up in SQL and use the SQL report security to control what that user could see.
Okay, great. The next one we have here is, there's still an Excel cache issue with pivot reports in GP 2016. I had to add VB code to all of my pivot reports to mitigate this issue, and I've seen it in forums for the pivot reports that are stocked with GP as well.
Yeah, you know, we have seen that occasionally. It's not, at least with the customers that we have, we've not seen that across the board as a problem, but we have seen that in a couple of environments where, you know, the cache does tend to kind of get in the way. Microsoft's aware of it. We're aware of it. We haven't seen them actually say that there's a workaround on that. I think you found one. That is something they're aware of, and so my personal opinion is, in a service pack to Office 2016 or maybe Office 2017 or whatever the next release is, hopefully they will find a little bit better solution, but we have seen that in very, very few cases. But yes, you're right, it does exist.
All right, well, it looks like that's all the questions that have come in so far.
All right, well, I think we're right on top of the time here. So.
I think that is one of the better timed ones we've had here.
We couldn't have planned it better.
Well, perfect. So if any later questions do come up, feel free to reach out to Brian or your account executive if you'd like to learn more about anything during today's presentation. And on behalf of everyone at Interdyne BMI, we just want to thank you for your attendance and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Michael. Bye.
Bye.